Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Liam Critchley and I'm a subject matter expert in chemistry and nanotechnology fields. I'm really pleased to be invited here today to interview Landon Mertz, the CEO of Cerion Nanomaterials. Hi Landon.
Hey there, Liam.
Good to meet you. I'm looking forward to a highly informative and fast-paced dialogue with you today to discuss what's next for the nanomaterials industry. As we both know, there's been a lot of impacts recently, both positive and negative. Many of which have been unexpected because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But before we get to that, Landon, why don't you tell us a little bit about Cerion, as your company is unique in a number of ways within the nanotechnology sector?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Liam. So Cerion Nanomaterials is a 15-year-old company. We're based in Rochester, New York. And we're one of the largest in the United States for designing, scaling, and manufacturing nanomaterials. Most of our focus is on metal oxide, ceramic nanoparticles. And what we did as a company is we took a decades-old expertise that was developed at Kodak around precipitation-based reactions, and then we invested heavily to bring it well beyond the current state of the art. And subsequently, over many years, what we did is we added additional synthesis processes, mainly to support growth, and because different materials need different synthetic approaches, whether that's for technical reasons or cost reasons. As a company, we're not typical in our space. We don't develop products to solve industrial challenges. What we really do is we provide advanced expertise in nanomaterials to companies who are looking to leverage them into their products. And so most oftentimes these are mid and large cap companies, mostly in the US and the EU and to some extent in Asia. And I get asked really often, why is it that we chose this path? And ultimately what it came down to is developing advanced expertise in nanomaterials is really expensive and it takes a long time. And the majority of our customers who are in the early stages doing their product development, they're looking to get their products to the market as fast as possible and as cost effectively as possible. And they're certainly not looking to develop expertise in a whole new area of material science. So what we do, we support them cradle to grave. We take them from their applied research efforts all the way through to manufacturing. And what sets us apart as a firm, there's really three core competencies here. The first would be design. So we put a special focus on expertise for precision control of not only the size attributes of nanoparticles, but also their technical attributes. Scale up, which is where we really shine. We very routinely scale materials anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 times whatever we make in the lab. And most important, preserving the critical technical attributes of the material along the way, which is unfortunately where most companies run into challenges. And then manufacturing. Our plant today is set up for 150 metric tons of production. We're in the process of expanding that now to about 500 metric tons. And I would hope over the next 5 to 10 years that we'll be somewhere in the 1,000 metric ton range. And just last parting thought, most of our customers, they're mid-cap, large-cap companies, both domestic here in the US, but also a lot of multinationals. And we work on a lot of customers' next generation product programs. So we're really restricted on how much we can share, but these are all household names that you and the viewers would be aware of. And we also do quite a bit of work supporting the defense community. And that's all throughout the supply chain of the defense industrial base.
All right, thanks, Landon, for the comprehensive overview there. Sounds like you got a lot of really interesting work going on at Cerion, and hopefully that is going to continue into the near future and beyond. So now if we start to look at the overall industry with respect to what's been going on recently and the COVID-19 pandemic. So how has the nanomaterials industry and industry in general for that matter, because obviously nanomaterials covers, as you mentioned, a lot of industries, how have they been impacted by the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So we're one of the fortunate few that never really had to shut down through the pandemic. And so as a company, we're ahead of our plan for the year. Fundamentally, what has occurred in the nanomaterials industry, I believe it's a broader trend in material science, is firms are substantially weaker today than they were before the pandemic. And whether that was caused by shutdowns, supply chain disruptions, a lot of customers who slowed orders or stopped them entirely. And what this has done to firms is it's created these fairly significant cash shortfalls, and in some cases have brought those firms precariously close to bankruptcy. And there's a well understood fact on why that happens. Most companies do not let idle cash just sit around. They put it to use. They might invest in growth of the firm, productivity of their manufacturing, returning capital to their shareholders. And as you know, and most know, in the United States, we have this program, which is called the PPP stimulus. And what it was really designed to do was bridge companies through the worst of the pandemic so they could get to the other side. Now, our firm, we didn't apply for it, but what we did do is we performed an analysis based on publicly available information to really try and understand how materially was our industry impacted. And what we found in our early analysis was 80 firms applied, and they received over $71 million in stimulus, mostly to maintain payroll, but also to cover other expenses. And so there's no doubt with those 80 firms, some large, some small, and medium sized, that our industry has been disproportionately impacted.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, there's a lot of impacts which are happening. And with this, what are the what do you think will be the second and third order effects of all this?
Yeah, so a lot of firms today are really still operating because they have access to that stimulus. And if you're tracking the activity here in the United States at the federal level, there has been a continued debate on the level of funding that may be made available to companies in the fall and winter. And unfortunately, there's a high degree of uncertainty around what that will look like. And so you really got to ask yourself at the end of the day, will PPP happen? What will be the level at which it'll happen? And what really happens if there's a second wave? And how might that impact the viability of a company? Now, each firm, they're going to face different circumstances. If they're pre-revenue, they're going to have difficulty raising money, especially if they're not meeting their goals. And if they can raise money, it's going to cost them more than it would have before. And, frankly, this is because investors are actively adjusting what they view as the risk-reward premium for their investments. If a firm in the nanomaterials industry is more early stage, much the same, they should be able to raise money, but it would be at a higher cost. And then for mature businesses like Cerion, most of the impact is balance sheet related. So having to increase inventory to offset long delays in the supply chains, expenses surrounding how to keep people safe. And these things aren't the end of the world, but they do eat up cash.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And obviously, with everything going on, developing a response to these kind of situations is going to be obviously important. So how has Cerion evolved in the current situation and scenarios, a response to the COVID pandemic with respect to your research, manufacturing, and your business operations? It's like, have you planned for COVID essentially? Yeah.
So the main focus that we have internally at the company is what we call the 5 Ps: prior planning prevents poor performance. Now, we saw COVID happening in China back in January, and by early February, we started to pull together our response plans. And we tackled everything that you could think of, from health safety matters all the way through to supply chain issues. And the way we viewed it was we were uncertain, would it happen in the United States? But we did know that we needed an insurance policy to prevent against disruption. And this really did pay dividends come March when the virus broke. And truthfully, our planning really has never stopped since that point. So now we really got to think about where we are today and into the future. And so the next logical question you have to ask is, how long will this go? So as a company, we are planning for a second wave. We are planning for an inability to travel. And we're assuming that a vaccine rollout in the United States probably isn't going to happen until sometime in the second quarter of 2021. And in our planning analysis, we ultimately assume that life won't begin to return to normal until really towards the end of 2021. So that's the time horizon that we're working on. But you have to have robust safety plans. Plan now is what should be happening. I would assume most firms already have health and safety plans in place. And if you don't have a robust safety plan, or even if you do, I would say it's time to dust it off and just make sure that it still reflects the needs of your operation. I know from Cerion's perspective, our plan is 20, 25 pages long. It's extremely detailed about all aspects of our operation. And since February, we've revised it, I think, 3 or 4 times. Another thing that I think is really important for companies is to set very clear expectations, not only about the personal responsibilities that team members carry, but also the obligations of the managers to the company and to their direct reports. And our view has been, it really does take time to get this right, but it's absolutely critical to preventing future disruption. And of course, I think everyone knows this, but why is this planning important? When you have a really well-developed plan, it helps you avoid thinking on the fly and truthfully making critical mistakes. So when we started planning in February, this really paid off, because when the virus set into the United States, we knew what we were going to do, how we were going to react. We did make, obviously, modifications on the fly, but the net result for our organization was we only suffered a 1-week disruption to our R&D and manufacturing operations, where we shut down, basically transitioned over to our highest level of escalation policy for safety, and then resumed operations. The other thing around planning is you got to remember, employees really are the engine that makes your company, your machine run. And you need them to feel safe. If you don't make employees feel safe, and if you don't make them feel protected, you're not going to be able to sustain your operations.
I think you seem quite prepared and, for want of a phrase, on the ball with everything that's been going on here. So knowing what you've learned and implemented within Cerion, what are some of the best practices you would recommend for both the nanotechnology industry and the specialty chemical industries as a whole regarding the pandemic health and safety response?
Yeah, so we've talked high level about strategy, planning, setting expectations inside the organization. So it might be helpful to focus more on tactical issues. So for health and safety, we have 3 facilities. In our offices, we closed them. Everyone from our offices is now working remotely. We did have a discussion at one point, should we bring them back during the summer? But ultimately, we felt that everybody had settled into their new reality and their new rhythm, and that it would be too disruptive to operations. With respect to our R&D, what we did is when COVID broke out, our plan of action was to have staggered shifts, basically to keep our R&D operation moving. But what we've done since then is we've really aggressively increased the footprint of both our wet labs and our dry labs. And the goal here was really to isolate as many of our researchers and technicians and quality control people to the maximum extent possible. And then with respect to manufacturing, a lot of our plant is automated. So this obviously reduces the number of people you need to have in the plant at any given time. But we have moved to extended hours, weekends. In some cases, we've surged to second and third shifts, and that's worked pretty well for us. Another tactical thing is we continue to stockpile PPE. When the pandemic first hit, as you may recall, China was actually buying up as much of the PPE as possible from other countries, including the United States. So by the time we needed PPE, or as an industry, it really wasn't available. And so what we have been doing is, again, assuming there's a second wave, we just source directly from China. This is what we started doing in February. It's still what we do now. We get all of our N95s and surgical masks there. And the cost for those assets today is more than 50% lower than the cost that they were in February. And then, we're a chemicals company. So when it came to disinfectant and things like hand sanitizer, we decided the best course of action was really just to manufacture this in-house. And truthfully, it paid off, because still to this day here in the US, it's very difficult to get commercial supply. But one thing I would recommend from a tactical perspective more than anything, and this is the approach that we've taken here, is the best defense to keeping your employees safe is to supply their families with PPE. And we have done that aggressively at a considerable cost. But you have to realize as managers in a business, you can very, very tightly control what happens inside your organization. But your employees don't live in their labs. They don't live, in your corporate headquarters. They go home. They have interactions with, obviously, their direct family members and friends. And so, to the extent that you can provide health and safety measures to the people around them, you really are doing the best job you can to keep them safe.
Thank you. It's great what lengths that you go into to protect employees, and obviously a lot of people could learn from that, because, as we all know, the employees are the cogs that make everything tick within the organization. So, like, with that in mind, what steps can industry leaders now take if they're concerned about the survivability or the financial stability of their business, and what are some of the best practices that they can now do to protect their business?
Yeah, so every firm is going to be different, right? They're all unique, so they're going to have different needs. But I think the best advice I could provide would really be to pull out to 30,000 feet and talk about, I'd say, 3 core issues that should be focused on. So the first, from my perspective, would be shoring up, the company's strategies and tactics. You want to get lean. You want to focus on essentials only. And from my perspective, this would not be the time to go on a big excursion around expense, especially if it's speculative. The second, if you're a manufacturer, is truthfully, now is not the time to be running a lean manufacturing or just-in-time operation. It's just not practical given the conditions and the environment created by COVID. So if firms haven't already done it, what they should be doing is looking to increase their inventory holdings substantially. And what you're really doing is you're just buying an insurance policy against supply chain disruption. And then the third, and I touched on it before, really is shore up your finances. If you don't have sufficient cash reserves, now's the time to be out raising money. Honestly, you should have been doing it in the spring or the summer. It is going to take longer. It is going to cost more money. If firms haven't done it, they need to get moving. And if you're, a cash flow positive, profitable company like we are, what you really need to be doing is earmarking cash on your balance sheet to guard against those disruptions. And that's what we've done. And it really does allow you to just get ahead of, cash risks to your business if you do have a disrupting event that occurs later.
Okay, thank you. I mean, some of the points you've talked on, like throughout the interview, is about some of the economic challenges that the nanomaterials community is now facing thanks to COVID. Obviously, we know in these kind of situations that there are going to be negatives, there are going to be issues. However, looking at the other side, have you found that there's going to be any economic bright spots thanks to the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I truthfully see a lot of very interesting opportunities ahead of us. So first, if we just back out and we go back to this kind of macroeconomic view and look at the economic environment, I think what we can say with a high degree of certainty is COVID's going to organically reorganize what the competitive marketplace looks like. And why is this? When you have a very long-term economic expansion, you have markets that are just absolutely flush and awash with capital. And there's really two things that end up happening. The first is a lot of new companies get created. Some of them do deserve to be operating in the market. They've got good technology. They got a good value proposition. And truthfully, some of them don't deserve to be in the market, but they're awash with capital so that they can sustain themselves. And when you get to the other side of, an economic boom and start to move into bust, what you inevitably have are these zombie companies that are usually heavily indebted, and they really struggle to meet their obligations during the good times. And when the bad times come, it's virtually impossible. And so these companies get flushed out of the system, and most of them will go bankrupt. And it's unfortunate for the employees, but my view is that it's actually healthy for the larger industry. And why is that? The other firms can basically compete for that new business, and they'll come out the other side really more vibrant economically and more competitive than they were before. And I see that as a good thing. The second opportunity I see is there are a lot of firms that are just weaker because of the pandemic, and they just have less room to operate. And so if a firm can afford to do it, my view is now's really the time to invest and accelerate your market penetration. This has been our primary strategy. Like I mentioned, because of good planning, we've been largely untouched. And we were aggressively investing into sales, marketing, and innovation before COVID. But now we've really redoubled our efforts into this area to capture market share. And then two other thoughts that I would have here is I think there are going to be good merger and acquisition opportunities. I can see a very realistic scenario where you have two good firms who may consider merging to improve their profitability and more effectively compete. And I think you're going to see some good acquisition opportunities, whether it's for technology or if you want to, in essence, acquire for inorganic growth. And then the last point, I think, would be a more level playing field internationally. So no surprise to you, Liam, the United States, Europe, China, Russia, these are all the major players in nanomaterials today. China's fiscal policy response has been fairly muted. It's only been about the equivalent of, I think it's 6 to 6.2% of GDP. And my view is they really can't afford to do much more stimulus than that because their economy is highly, highly indebted. And Russia, their fiscal policy response, truthfully, it's barely even registered on the scale. Last I checked, I think it was about 2.5% of GDP. Now, why does this matter? In China and Russia, companies in the nanomaterial field are receiving backing and they're receiving subsidies for commercialization, which is something that most Western countries don't allow to happen. They want the free market to operate. And so what this does is it puts the US, the UK, the EU really on a more even footing with Russia and China, at least for now. And I think that's a fantastic thing for the industry. I know from Cerion's point of view, we think it's a good thing because we operate globally.
Thank you. It's great to hear that there's actually some positives or some potential positives that can come out of a bad situation, for at least some, and for those who are willing to move within the industry. I mean, we've talked about it before, and you've mentioned about the longevity of the pandemic. I mean, we both know, and probably many people watching know, that the pandemic in some form or other is likely to be around for a significant portion of time. So because of that, how can companies now work with their customers to mitigate like risk going forward? So whether that's like risk respect to the inventory or the research programs, what should companies be doing?
Yeah, so we talked previously about, I'll call it strategic planning, financial planning, some tactical approaches. So I think really the thing to focus on here would be two other axioms that are more forward-facing to customers. We've adopted an approach, and I would highly recommend it for everybody else, is throughout your organization, really having an understanding that you need to provide the maximum level of flexibility in meeting customers' needs. And the other is really over communicating and coordinating with customers around their needs. Most customers really do fundamentally understand that with COVID, disruptions are a way of life for now. And what they just don't want is last minute surprises. So if a firm's got a problem internally that they got to work through, it really is in the best interest of both the firm and the customer to collaborate tightly to ensure that they can meet their goals. And what I've seen and I've heard from some of my peers is that when they have over communicated and worked with their customers, that they were able to get through the other side of the problem successfully.
Yeah, I mean, communication with customers is always key. Probably even more so in these kind of times. But obviously with any kind of, like, let's say, I'm going to say negative situation. In this case, we can call it the pandemic, because it does have a lot of negative impacts. Obviously, within a lot of these kind of situations, there are opportunities for learning. So with that in mind, how can industry leaders now learn from this pandemic and use it to prepare for future disruptions? So that whether that's further pandemics or natural disasters, economic risks, societal risks, there's many risks out there that they could learn from. So what should industry leaders now be doing to learn and prepare for the future?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Liam. And truthfully, I could write a book on this particular topic. So, something that mid and large cap companies do really, really well is developing emergency response plans and contingency plans for all manner of disruption, right? And ultimately, why is that? Is they want to, if a disruption happens, they want to mitigate it, solve it, and move on as fast as humanly possible. And those disruptions can take all kinds of forms. What if my plant goes down? What if I've got a labor strike? But fundamentally, you just need to be prepared to respond. Small and medium-sized businesses, which is the majority of the nanomaterials community, they just haven't reached this level of maturity yet. And when I look at this as a leader, I really say to myself, what is my job? And my job really is to think about two critical areas of our business. The first is growth, and the second is risks. And because risk comes in all shapes and sizes, what you really need to do is pragmatically look at your business. You have to identify the weak spots, really, no matter how remote they are. And then, going forward, if you can identify risks that you can resolve, well, develop a long-range strategy and tactics to make them a non-issue. If they're more foundational, you're never going to be able to get rid of them or fully mitigate them. Have a plan in place. How are you going to respond if they happen? And be prepared now, so all you have to do is dust off your plan and execute. Now, I'm not advocating for small and medium-sized businesses to go to the same level and depth as perhaps a large cap business would. But even if an organization takes the first step of writing a single page problem solution statement for each risk that they see, no matter how remote, and jot out some thoughts and ideas on what they may do to address them, I think that's a great start in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. And if we can just kind of wrap up the whole interview, we've talked here about many different aspects of the nanomaterial industry, from both the positives, the negatives, any of the challenges and issues and the potential, for growth in the sector in the future. So with all that in mind and like an overall view, what do you believe the future of the nanomaterials industry is going to look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess to answer the question first, we have to step back in time a little bit. So material science really has been a pillar throughout the centuries for advancing society, improving lives, keeping us safe. And, just a couple examples, you can look at Rome. They invented cement, which radically impacted multiple industries, but also society. During the Middle Ages, you had things like Damascus steel, which, became a cornerstone for military advantage, but it also opened up a whole new set of industries and capabilities. And then if we fast forwarded more to today and you looked at the Silicon Age, this has ushered in everything from computers to mobile phones, industrial control equipment, you name it. So whether people realize it or not, material science really is the engine that makes the economy run. And so there's no doubt in my mind, at least, that material science, and more specifically nanomaterials, will continue to make new and very long-lasting contributions now, but certainly well into the future. And where can nanomaterials play a role? I have always subscribed to this notion that society really has 6 macro trends ahead of it. It's mostly driven by population pressures. And there are things that as a society we're going to need to address. And I know that nanomaterials plays a role in these areas. And those kind of core areas are energy, food, future cities, human health, raw materials, water and air. And, we can just take a look at a few of them, but energy, which is a very hot topic these days, at least for the last 10 years, I'm sure it's going to continue well into the future. Nanomaterials right now are having substantial impacts on things like energy density of storage devices. They're starting to make their way into thermal management of buildings, lightweighting for aerospace and automotive. If we look at future cities, things like corrosion inhibition, sensing, self-healing or self-cleaning coatings. So if you assume that these 6 macro trends will persist post-COVID, and I certainly prescribe to that notion, I have no doubt that nanotech is going to continue to operate in these areas and play a critical role. So at the end of the day, what I see, and I see it daily here at Cerion, is nanotechnology is a very pervasive material. Many more companies are incorporating them into their products and their systems than really ever before. And, the industry is rapidly growing. Granted, COVID had an impact, but I see this as a momentary blip in time, and I really do see fantastic growth opportunities, not only for Cerion, but also the industry for many decades ahead.
Thank you, Landon. Thank you for wrapping everything up and with the future outlook. And thank you for the interview today. I'm hoping anyone watching this is going to find it interesting as I have to have the discussion. And hopefully there's a lot of people out there who can take what you've said and perhaps implement it or learn from it in best how to go forward with this pandemic and any challenges that may occur in the future. So to everyone who's been watching, thank you. I've been Liam Critchley. I've been with Landon Mertz, CEO of Cerion Nanomaterials, and thank you and goodbye.